I'm Naveen Agarwal, and welcome to this special Substack Live session of Let's Talk Risk. I'm so excited to welcome Steve Silverman of the Silverman Group. And guys, we're going to talk about right now the chaos at the FDA and what's happening. Steve is my go to person for these questions because he spent 13 years, I believe, Steve, at the FDA in various positions of leadership. So he knows the agency from inside out. And also, he directly interacted with the agency from the outside in when he was leading the Advent group. So, Steve has a very broad perspective on this. And Steve also has started his own Substack. We'll talk about that in the program today. He's writing about what's happening with the FDA. So, guys, if you're just joining, make sure that you share your questions, comments, or even your own perspectives in the chat. Let's have a good conversation. So, Steve, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you very much for having me. And I think that your characterization of events at FDA, including the Device Center, is exactly right. It's chaos.
Yeah, and a lot is happening, right? And it's such a speed that we are just dizzy with
Yeah.
that. Can you bring us up to speed? I know you have been watching it very carefully. What has been going on in the last few months?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, let me start by saying that none of this is FDA specific, right? The current administration came in with a plan to dismantle and hamstring, in my opinion, multiple government agencies. And that's exactly what they've been doing. And FDA definitely is in the line of fire, along with other agencies that comprise HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services. So things like NIH and other research organizations, they're all dealing with this kind of disruption. So turn the lens back to FDA, and I'll talk specifically about the Device Center. There have been a number of actions over the last couple of months that have been extremely damaging to the Device Center. Going back to mid February, there was an announcement, I believe on February 15th, that said multiple individuals within the Device Center who have probationary status, which applies to people who were recently hired, meaning in the last 1 to 2 years, right? And it can include people who were already at the agency but promoted to new positions within that 1 to 2 year window. They don't have the same employment protections as permanent staff. And so back in mid February, there was an announcement that many of these individuals were just fired.
Hmm.
It's easy to get rid of these probationary staff. You're fired. It was pandemonium. It was a huge mess. Well, what the administration subsequently realized is that the people who they had fired, thinking that they were low hanging fruit, were actually absolutely essential to
Hmm.
CDRH operations that the administration backed. Things like technological understanding and capacity for new device technologies like digital devices, or I mean, one of the best stories is that the person who was selected to run OPEQ, which is the super office within the device center that houses all of the review components. It's a really senior job. Rusty, I always mess up his last name, so
Uh-huh.
apologies.
Uh-huh.
So something close to Sagan, but again, I'm goofing up his name, so I apologize. But in any event, he was probationary.
Yeah.
he was fired,
Oh my
right,
God.
on a
Uh-huh.
Saturday night. And when the administration tried to unring the firing bell, he was like, "Yeah, no, thank you, I'm not coming back." So that position, which requires unbelievable expertise, unicorns can
Hmm.
do that job, unfilled. So fast forward to mid March, the problem with FDA was compounded, right? Because there was another tranche of firings, this time career staff across FDA,
Hmm.
including CDRH. So many individuals inside CDRH, but also individuals outside CDRH that the center relies on for things like policy, guidance documents, user fee negotiations,
Hmm.
that staff was blown up, right? They were
Hmm.
just fired. And the repercussions of those firings are still being felt. So, what I can say is, a lot of staff gone,
Hmm.
and there are really open questions around things like how in the world the device center is going to go through the next round of user fee negotiations, which I think begins late this year, that requires really, really deep and comprehensive expertise. And I'm
Hmm.
not sure that anybody is still
Yeah.
left who knows what to do.
Yeah, we'll talk about user fees in just a minute. And I know many people are joining just now. So guys, if you're just joining, we're talking about what's happening with the FDA. And if you have any specific concerns or questions or even your own perspective, please share that in the chat with us. So Steve, does it sound like sort of random firing across the board, or is there some strategy behind it? Can you see something?
You know, that's a great question. No, not completely random, right? What I would say is some design, but not design by individuals who really understood the implications of what they're doing. So, if you look at the recent firings of FDA staff, which occurred in March, right? There was a statement, right? We're doing these firings, statement from the administration, we're doing these firings, but reviewers and inspectors are not going to be caught up in the firing. They're not going to be
Hmm.
fired. So, there will still be a review function, there will still be a post market inspection function. So that's an example of a specific strategy. The part that's not thought out is the fact that no reviewer or investigator operates in isolation. They are all part of teams, and the teams have different functions. And if those functions are not supported, then the team fails.
Hmm.
One quick example, it is true that an inspector is responsible for, an investigator, I should say, is responsible for post market oversight of device facilities. But
Hmm.
if that investigator needs to travel to a foreign country, for example, he or she relies on individuals in an administrative infrastructure within FDA who support their trip to foreign countries, for example,
Hmm.
to inspect device facilities. And that kind of travel, the travel arrangements, visa arrangements,
Hmm.
reimbursement for expenses, etc., incredibly complex and demanding.
Hmm.
So, with all of those people jettisoned from the agency, now I read the investigators are left um, doing the work themselves, which
Yeah.
means confusion, slowdowns, limited capacity to do what they were doing previously. Now, I have read that the administration plans to hire some number of contractors
Uh-huh.
to take on that responsibility. If that's true, it's hard for me to understand why the qualified permanent individuals who already knew the work were fired in the first place, and how the administration will effectively manage problems with putting contractors in place, like integrating them, getting
Yeah.
them aware of the work, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a mess.
Yeah, I can understand that, but so far it sounds like if the reviewers are in place, if some of the technical people are in place, it's not a raging fire yet, right? Maybe in the near future, if the reviewers are affected, then industry has to
Yeah,
really be upfront.
yeah. You know what, Naveen? I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, look, let me be thoughtful about what you're saying and try to give a clear sense of what I think is going on. Look, there are a lot of people who are still working in CDRH, and they're very, very mission oriented. And they
Mhm.
know that what they are fundamentally there to do is to evaluate devices that are not on the market yet to assure that they are safe and effective, and then to monitor the production of those devices after they're being marketed to make sure that they remain safe and effective.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really mission driven and talented. And so there is a decent contingent of individuals who are still doing that work, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are still they're making the donuts.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
but it remains to be seen, right? As the number of submissions continues, right? And they've been up in recent years, which is a
Yes.
good thing. Whether they can keep pace, whether they can maintain the necessary expertise to competently evaluate the devices that are not on the market yet and then to monitor them once they are on the market, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so if, for example, I have already read and heard that the number of inspections of device facilities is going to drop,
Yeah.
right? And so, no, there are a lot of things that are happening today that are really good and look like, right? They look like what FDA has done historically. I believe it will be really, really important to monitor going forward
Yeah.
whether FDA can keep pace with devices coming to market and on the market, whether FDA has the technological expertise to evaluate new technologies like digital products that
Mm-hmm.
incorporate AI, for example, and whether FDA/CDRH staff can do the kinds of things that they've done historically that are not directly related to product reviews, but that are crucial to product reviews.
Yeah.
Things like communicating with industry, putting out guidance documents on new, very challenging technical questions, educating uh, stakeholders, industry, healthcare providers, et cetera, about emerging device concerns, whether it's
Yeah.
quality issues with particular products or insufficient information offered across products in the pre-market space. All of those activities are really, really important pieces of the device
Yeah.
regulatory ecosystem. And I think we'll have to just watch
Yeah.
to see if the ecosystem suffers.
Yeah, and I think the kind of work you are describing that FDA does now almost routinely is what makes FDA as the leading
Yeah,
regulatory agency in the world. Everybody looks up to the
yeah,
FDA
yeah,
as the
yeah,
leading. Look at how much mess Europe is in with
yeah.
the
I know.
EUMDR, right? And compared to that, FDA is seen as a shining star. So now let's talk about that because I think the risk on the horizon, which I know we want to talk about today, and you have thought about that a lot, is the user fee program. Tell us a little bit, first of all, what that program is and why you are thinking that
Okay,
it is in jeopardy.
okay. So let me talk. I want to talk about two things, and I will try not to be long-winded. I want to talk about user fees, and I want to build on your point about how FDA is a leader in the device regulatory space for the world, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So let me start with that very quickly. That's not an accident. That's not an accident. There was a
Hmm.
lot of work going back, in my experience, to the time when Jeff Shuren became the head of the Device Center to establish FDA as a world leader in device regulatory policy and practice, right? That was the result of very, very intentional actions taken by him and others, resource commitments, attention to these kinds of advances. And there's a real risk that without support for that kind of initiative, the U.S. will lose
Hmm.
its primacy in device regulation. And who will become the premier device regulator? I don't know.
Yeah.
So that is one thing. Now let me talk about user fees. Look, first and foremost, user fees don't relate exclusively to devices. there are user fee programs for other FDA regulated products like drugs, both brand and generics. There are user fees in other agencies, right? There are other federal agencies that regulate other products where their stakeholders pay user fees to help support their operations. So this is nothing specific to CDRH, and frankly, it's not that unusual. Here's the issue. Every year, right, CDRH gets a pot of money from Congress that says to FDA, CDRH should do the following things with this money. And some of that money supports things like staffing, post market oversight, educational initiatives, et cetera, right?
Hmm.
But if you think about if you think of, I'm just switching metaphor, so I apologize. But imagine that you have a juice glass, right? What FDA CDRH gets from Congress every year fills up about 60% of the juice glass, but there's
Hmm.
still 40% that doesn't have juice. If the goal is to fill up the glass entirely, that's where user fees come in. And it's just
Hmm.
basically an agreement between CDRH and device stakeholders that says, look, we're going to charge you, device holders, a certain amount of money. You're going to kick in a certain amount of money every year. And in exchange, right, we are going to make commitments. And the commitments definitively and importantly are not to approve devices, right? I want to
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
very, very clear about this. CDRH is not agreeing to approve devices in exchange for money.
Hmm.
What CDRH is saying is like, yeah, there's lots of things that we, industry and CDRH on its own, can do to improve processes and create increase clarity
Hmm.
on regulatory issues. And in exchange for the 40% of juice that you're adding to the glass, we're going to make certain commitments, like we will reduce the total time that it takes for us to review 510(k) submissions. We will reduce the total time that is necessary for PMA review, or we will create more formal processes to allow sponsors, application sponsors, to meet with reviewers while their applications are under review
Hmm.
to get information from reviewers, to answer questions, to ask questions, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all process improvements,
Yeah.
right? To make the device review process better and to increase information from FDA to stakeholders, including device makers. That's user fees. That's it.
Yeah. So I like the point you're making is that, and to emphasize, it's not like a quid pro quo. Like industry
No,
pays us and we're
no,
gonna approve.
no.
No, no.
That's no.
It's
That's.
more
I mean,
like we are
that's
making a
just
commitment. We are making a commitment that your, for example, 180-day supplement or 30-day supplement will be reviewed and
yeah,
finalized
totally,
in a certain time frame,
totally, a hundred
right?
percent. That's it. That's
Okay.
it. That's it.
So
And
it's a
and and
very.
and
Mhm.
it's a really good mechanism, right? Because look, this is my opinion. But these statements about like industry capture, right, of
Yeah.
any part of FDA are just naive and uninformed, right?
Well, I think I think it appeals to the masses, right? Because
Yeah,
that's what they are
totally.
trying to speak
Right,
to,
right,
right?
right. It
So they're
appeals. It
trying
it
to do a
appeals.
narrative, right?
It
There's a
appeals.
narrative going on.
Yeah, it appeals to the masses, but it's so flimsy
Yes.
that it doesn't withstand even the kind of briefest review. Look, devices, as you and your listeners know, devices are complex.
Yeah.
And especially if you look at things like emerging technologies, FDA knows, CDRH knows, industry knows, other stakeholders know. CDRH is not the locus of all knowledge about these
Hmm.
products. And so the only way that we are going to get to intelligent regulation of these new technologies is some kind of communication and, where appropriate, collaboration
Hmm.
between FDA and outside stakeholders. Nobody is saying ever that FDA is surrendering its authority to outside stakeholders. But for sure, if there's a stakeholder who knows a lot about a particular issue that informs FDA's regulatory decision making, then it's crazy not
Yeah.
to allow FDA to learn from that stakeholder.
And I think that kind of a collaborative partnership with the FDA and the industry has been going on for a long time, and that's
Yeah.
one reason I believe that that's the reason why more than 1,000 artificial intelligence machine learning devices have been cleared by the FDA until now, and that trend is only continuing. And I was asking this question to my colleagues in Europe. Do you guys know how many AI ML devices have been approved in Europe? Nobody has the answer.
Yeah.
Nobody knows because it's not published. So let's come back to that now. Why I think in my private conversations with you, I have come to an understanding that you are concerned about the user fee program and its impact on innovation, on how FDA works. Tell us a little bit more about what is your thought process there.
Okay, look, first, a little bit of like shameless self promotion. I do publish a Substack column, and I have been planning to publish tomorrow in any event, notwithstanding this conversation on this topic. And so I'll talk more about it in
Nice.
writing tomorrow. But to get to your question, Naveen, look, there's there are two concerns, right? One relates to the current user fee commitments, right? So these user fees go through 5 round cycles, then they're renegotiated every 5 years. The agency and stakeholders are in the fifth iteration of these user fee negotiations. It's the term of art is Medufa, so it's Medufa 5. And agreements under Medufa 5 already exist. So one question is whether CDRH will still be able to meet its commitments now that its operations and workforce have been turned upside down. And I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I think it's a real risk, and I think that stakeholders, device firms, for example, really need to be paying attention to whether or not products that they submit for review or questions that they ask of the agency or attempts to engage the agency are proceeding as they have done historically, or they seem to be going offline. If they're going
Hmm.
offline, that's a big red flag, right?
Hmm.
So that's one risk. One risk is that current commitments aren't satisfied. There is a bigger risk, right? This is kind of like this is the Hiroshima scenario, which is to
Okay.
say,
Okay.
look, user fees were structured initially to avoid FDA relying on industry exclusively for fees, right?
Hmm.
And so Congress said to CDRH years ago, you are obligated to spend a certain level of the funds that we appropriate to you every year. And if you don't, right, you may not use user fees to accomplish your review work improvements, etc. And in some cases, you may have to return user fees that you have already collected. That makes sense to me, right? I mean, it's a good safeguard, right? I don't think 10, 15, 20 years ago, anybody ever thought that this would remotely be an issue, right? Because the
Hmm.
trajectory was, oh, yeah, well, CDRH wants to improve and grow over time. CDRH will always want and rely on appropriated funds. So this trigger, right, that kind of kills user fee funding is never going to be
Yeah.
pressed. It's just not the way the world works. Well, now the world works differently. And so many people have been kicked out of FDA and CDRH that it raises the question of whether the agency will be able to operate as it has historically and spend the appropriated funds that were given to it. Less people, less spending, real question of whether or not that trigger
Mm-hmm.
is hit. Um, if that happens and user fees disappear, right? Um, that's it.
That's it.
It's lights out, game over.
Yeah.
It doesn't. You and I were talking about this for a moment. It really doesn't signal the death of FDA device oversight. It does signal the death of efficient systems to assure that devices are reviewed completely within a predictable time frame and that the agency has the capacity to do crucial things like issuing guidance documents on key topics, engaging with industry, et cetera.
Yeah.
It is a catastrophic result. And one quick thing that I'll also say, Naveen, this is the conspiracy theory part of my mind.
Uh-huh.
Like I would be happy to say, oh yeah, this is just. I think probably all of this is happening because the current administration didn't really understand the implications of its cuts. But Kennedy has been, RFK Jr., the head of HHS, has been very, very clear that he thinks that that device regulators and industry are in bed together, and that user
Yeah.
fees are a bad thing. So
Yeah.
maybe he wants to see user fees die.
Okay. Okay. So I know, Steve, we are running short on time, but I want you to tell us a little bit about your what the FDA Substack that you. This is a brilliant, brilliant title. I love it. But more importantly, what you are writing in your on your Substack are very tangible tips for device manufacturers to navigate this environment. I love the way you are positioned. Can you share a couple of things? First of all, share with us the vision of your Substack and share a couple of examples of tangible tips you have shared with us already.
Okay, so look, first, and foremost, I think is um, thanks to you, Naveen, because you were absolutely integral to getting me onto Substack and understanding how to use it. So you get whatever I accomplish, you get a huge share. So and thanks.
Hmm.
Now, look, all I'm trying to do really is pick up on issues that device stakeholders, including firms, are paying attention to that they may not fully understand, and just in a very simple way break it down, right? So if I pick a particular topic like user fees, for example, my Substack is broken out into three parts. One part is what happened, just like
Hmm.
what's going on. Um, the next part is what does this mean for stakeholders, right? And so, like in the case of device firms, like okay, what happened? What does this mean for individual device firms? What are the risks and likely outcomes? And then the last piece is what should stakeholders do about it, right? What in the case of firms, for example, what should somebody sitting inside of a device firm that is trying to think through this particular issue, what should they do about it? And sometimes as I've written, the answer is nothing. Just watch
Yeah.
carefully.
So, can you give us
That's
an
it.
example? Give us an example of something that you would like to share with our audience as a tip for now.
With respect to
To
user
anything.
fees, well,
Either user fees or something else that you have already written about. I know you have shared already many tips, but is there
so
something you want to highlight?
user fees are top of mind, right?
Okay.
It's what I've been writing about the last couple of days, and so I'm going to stick with that. What I would say is this: going back to the two scenarios that I described, current user fee commitments going off the rail, and then the program breaking down entirely. For device firms, right? I would say with respect to the current user fee commitments not being met, you need to be individually engaged, which is to say, if you have submissions before the agency, make sure that you know who's your lead reviewer. Is
Mm-hmm.
that person still there? Are they communicating with you? Right. And if not, and problems come up, really don't hesitate about going to that individual's manager and saying, like, and you can include like
Yeah.
the lead reviewer, but say like, hey, just like trying to figure this issue out and didn't, waiting on a response and hoping that you can help. And the reason is that there's a risk that people will be forced out of the agency without telling their without telling individuals who are relying on them for answers that they're gone. So that's
Yeah.
one thing.
Got
Then
you.
with respect to elimination of the user fee program, I honestly don't think that is an area where an individual firm is going to have a great amount of influence. Still, it is a perfect example of a situation where a device firm can decide to work collaboratively with
Hmm.
other firms, with other stakeholders, whether it's through a trade association or some other association, to take a stand, to get
Yeah.
the word out to stakeholders, patient and healthcare provider groups, press, Congress, about what the risks are.
Yeah.
And it's not coming from individual firms. It's from associations that I think for very appropriate reasons give individual firms more strength and some cover.
Got you. So, Steve, I know we are running short on time, but there is one question I'm dying to ask you now,
Sure.
right? Just for my own curiosity. Oh, so let's say FDA is not able to make the user fee commitments because of one reason or another. Can the industry sue FDA?
That is a really good question. Let me just say this. Like, it's a formal for the current user fee agreement, it's a formal agreement, right?
Right, right.
And so there are mechanisms for industry to take if FDA doesn't meet its commitments. I don't honestly, I don't think that it requires a lawsuit, but as I understand it, there are mechanisms by which industry can stop paying the
Hmm.
funds that it promised to pay under the current commitment and can even claw back some of the money that was already paid. And that's not something that requires a lawsuit. It's more of a legislative and regulatory process. But there are consequences for sure.
But this is where my mind was going when I was listening to you, is that the user fee program dies its natural death because industry withdraws its support and says we're not going to pay anymore because we're not seeing the results. So it's not government is not being blamed. They didn't do
Right.
anything wrong. The industry. Anyway, Steve, what a fascinating conversation. And guys, we like to keep these conversations limited to 30 minutes because we respect your time. So thank you for joining. If you joined us midway or you could not join at all, a recording will be available very soon. And go subscribe to Steve's Substack. Steve, tell us once again what the title is and how people can find you.
It's a I can't take total credit. The title is What the FDA. That's
Okay.
it. What the FDA question mark. It's on Substack. You can search for it. It's free. So,
Yeah.
by all means, take a look. And if you want to follow up with me offline about anything that I've written or other topics, I'm easy to find.
Wonderful, Steve. What a great conversation we had
Thank you.
today. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate the time you have taken. I wish you all the best
Thank you.
with the work you are helping, like so many people in the industry. So I wish you all the best. Continue your Substack journey, and good luck to you. So thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Bye bye.